Artis Stevens, welcome to Anti-Racism Live.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, the first question I wanted to ask you, Artis, is could you tell us about your work and mission at Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and what drew you to this organization?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and again, I appreciate being on to be able to talk with you about the mission, but also just the important work of eradicating racism across the world. Big Brothers Big Sisters, we're the largest U.S.-based mentoring organization, and part of what we do is we were founded as an organization, and we call it a Jedi Youth Empowerment Organization. We're founded as an alternative innovation of the justice system to create more equity in young people's lives by bringing together diverse communities so that every young person could feel included for opportunity and better lives, right? That's why we call ourselves a Jedi-focused justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, Jedi-focused youth empowerment organization, because we were founded with that in our DNA. And our whole focus and entire purpose of being is to ensure that young people have mentoring relationships, positive adult relationships in their lives that create access, belonging, and also the type of inclusion that they feel connected to this world and have a voice and feel empowered to be able to do good things in the world and thrive in their own lives. I'm sorry, I was just going to say what drew me to this mission. For me, it was very personal, right? My story really goes back to joining as the first Black CEO of this organization, because during the pandemic and the social unrest that was happening around the world, there was a name, Ahmaud Arbery. And Ahmaud Arbery was murdered on the streets of Brunswick, Georgia, my hometown, for being Black. And it stuck with me, right? And it stuck with me in terms of asking a question of what could I do even more to make commitment, to be able to give and support the work that was happening around communities. And at the time, I was in a career and I was enjoying my career, but I knew there was a different calling that was on my life at the point. And it was a couple weeks later after that incident, after that situation, that heinous act had happened, that Big Brothers Big Sisters reached out to me. And joining this organization was like looking in the mirror. I saw myself and the young people we serve, the communities that we serve. And I've been proud to be a part of this mission for the last 3 years now.
Artis, amazing. Incredible. I want to ask you, what does the 21st of March, the day for the elimination of racial discrimination, mean to you?
Well, part of what it means is what sometimes is at the root cause, right, of where we know racism too often emanates. A lot of it's from the standpoint of education and people not being fully educated about others. A lot of it roots from the sense of being isolated, right? And isolated both physically, but also isolated mentally, right? Never coming in contact with differences or being taught that something's wrong with people who are different than you. And when I look at some of the root causes in terms of the environments we grow up, generationally, what we're taught, it goes back to what things are the antidote for lack of education, for lack of connection, for isolation, from generational teaching. It's relationships, it's connections, it's the people that we're around, the experiences that we have. What this day means for me, as much as it is about eradicating racism, it's about the proactive things that allow us to do that effectively. And that's why an organization, a mission like Big Brothers Big Sisters is so important, because what we do is bring people together from various backgrounds, from places that they would have never met in their lives. And we create connections so that not only do we help to empower and make young people better, but young people and their voice and their empowerment help to make the adults who connect with them better as well. And that's what makes our community and ultimately our world that much better.
Thank you, Artis. We're seeing an increase in racism, hatred, and divide within our communities around the world. What's your assessment of the situation, and how can mentorship help turn this around?
Well, if you look at what's happening across our world, so much of it is around polarization. The idea of feeling polarized in communities, there's a dissonance, right? And there's a lot of things that attribute to that. right? The way that we're raised, the technology that we use, right? The proliferation of social media, even though it connects us, sometimes it makes us even more distant from each other. It also allows people who may feel have a certain level of intentionality about themselves to rise up and use their voice in ways that are not beneficial, that are not helpful, that brings out sometimes the worst in us. But I'm also a true believer in the power of people, the power of humanity. And the power of humanity is the idea of doing good for each other, hoping to contribute to be better for each other. That's what mentorship is about. The one thing that's been around in our country and been around, I would say, in human existence since the beginning of time, outside of eating, drinking, sleeping, all that good stuff, has been mentorship. Has been teaching one generation from the next to the next to the next to the next that helps us to evolve, that helps us to grow. That's the power of mentorship. The power of mentorship is teaching, right? So think about if for everything that we learn about hate, the things that we learn about intolerance, the things that we learn about discrimination that's passed from one generation to the next, to one community to the next, can also be the things that allow us to pass the best of us. And that's what mentorship does. Passing the best of who we are, the best of humanity from one generation to the next, to the next. And that's how we ultimately break cycles, by passing down and ensuring that the light that we have is not just the light that we pass within our own families, but it's when the light that we can pass to others in our communities through forms of mentorships and organizations like ours.
As the first Black CEO in the organization's 100 plus year history, your position is not only a sign of progress, but it also shows young people what's possible for their future. What's the importance of representation, both in leadership positions like yours, but also in day-to-day mentorship?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. It's a great question. It's everything. When I was raised, one of the things, I was the first in my family to go to college and to graduate. The reason I was able to go to college, my dad didn't have a college degree. I didn't know a lot of people in my community where I grew up. But what my dad and my mom did is they exposed me to people who did. I had an opportunity to see it, right? I had the opportunity to see something that was outside of my 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks of where I lived, and to see something that was in another world for me. We use this line, if you can see it, you can be it. That's the idea of what we talk about in mentorship. For a lot of the young people that we serve, right? 70% of young people we serve are communities of color. 55% live in poverty. Another 20% has a parent that's incarcerated in the parole system. What we always say is that none of those numbers define who our kids are, but what often defines them is access. We are a mission. This is a story. The work that we have to do as a world is all about access, giving each other, giving young people especially access to empowerment, to opportunity, to relationships, to mentorship. That's the meaning of when you ask that question. For me, it's a question of access in terms of representation, because when you see people who come from where you are, who have cultural backgrounds, who have the same type of understanding, who may look like you look, when you haven't seen them there traditionally, it gives you a level of access in terms of being able to take steps and to break through barriers that you never thought that you had the ability to break through, because you know someone else who looks like you, and maybe you've come from the same place that you come from. It's part of the journey that you're on as well, and maybe you've been on a similar journey. So that's something that we look for a lot in our work right now. We have thousands of kids on our waiting list, and a lot of those kids are boys, right? And those are boys who are looking for men in their lives, right? And not that others can't come along and support. We need everybody around the table, but we also know that we need people that recognize and understand their journey as boys. And that's why men are so important to be able to come, because that's what they're looking for, to understand and to say, hey, I want someone who has maybe walked this path that I'm looking to walk. And how can I understand that much more effectively? So we are an organization of representation. It's important for the way that we live. And then the last thing I will say is representation comes in a lot of different ways. So we think about and talk about it certainly in the levels of gender, race, identity,
but it's also cultural. It's also interest. It's also other beliefs that we have. And that's what we want to do, is ensure that we're creating safe spaces for young people, for communities. And that's what representation is all about, creating safe space so people can feel like they can grow, they can strive, and that they can belong in places that allow them to continue to be who they are.
As you think about eliminating racial discrimination and what's required to get there, where do you draw your hope and inspiration from?
Yeah, well, I talk about this a lot. For me, my hope personally was started and initiated from my dad. Right, my dad was a pastor. He was involved in the civil rights movement as well. Very community driven in where he grew up. But I come from a long line of preachers and pastors, and I'll never forget that when I was growing up, everyone asked me if I was going to be a minister like my dad. And I was 7 years old at the time, by the way. And I went to my dad and I said, "Hey, do I need to be a minister, a preacher like you?" And he looked at me and he smiled. And I'll never forget the words that he told me, because they've been a guiding principle of my life. He said, "Everyone has their ministry in this world. You have to find yours." And that's always been the guiding principle for me, that it unleashed me and unbound me from the idea of generational expectations, right? Or I had to walk in a certain way, or I was bound by what I looked like, how much money we had, what community that I grew up in, but that I could walk in my own steps, that I could be guided by my own path, that I could make my own decisions that were not dictated by someone else. And that's the same level of empowerment that we want for every single other person in this world, that they can feel like they can design their own path and not be defined or bound by structural racism, by things that may happen in their communities, by external factors that don't allow them to truly excel and to be who they are. That's the promise of humanity. That's the promise of what we want every young person in this world to feel like. And that's my belief and why I'm in this role, what I believe my purpose is in this world, and what I hope to advance more in terms of helping more young people, more communities thrive and to define and become who they want to be as they pursue their own purpose.
What advice do you have for the person who feels disempowered and unequipped to make a difference through mentorship or indeed other means?
Yeah, probably the first thing I would say is, when you're thinking about mentorship, that you don't feel like you have to be perfect. I think too often folks feel like, "Hey, how can I mentor someone? Because I have all these things that happen in my life," right? In many cases, that's the ideal mentor. We need you. People need you, because we always use this phrase, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present in someone's life. And that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I would share with everyone who's listening and viewing here today.
Is that you don't always have to be perfect in what you do, but what young people depend on, what others who you mentor depend on, is for you to show up, to be present, to be persistent in their lives. And then the other thing I would say is, understand that you get as much out of it as the person that you're pouring into as well. And that's what we see every single day in our mentoring relationships, is that the adults who get involved constantly say that the young people who they mentor are impacting their lives more than they're impacting theirs. So know that the idea of mentorship, the idea of getting involved, is reciprocal, that you can impact someone's life, but just as much as you're impacting them, they're impacting you as well. And when we talk about what's happening in our world today, one of the biggest ways that we can eradicate the type of hate sometimes that we see,
The type of racism that we see, the type of intolerance that we see, is by getting
to know other people that don't come from where you come, that don't look like you, that may not identify the same way that you identify. And yet, understanding that there is this singular commonality that we all share. And that singular commonality is wanting to be better in this world, wanting to thrive and wanting to have good lives in this world. Everyone wants that level of access and opportunity and happiness in their lives, right? And we can make that happen more often when we connect together and we reach out to others that don't maybe have all the opportunity that we have, or sometimes who do, but need that extra encouragement and support. That's the power of human connection, and that's the power of what Big Brothers Big Sisters does every single day.
Finally, for the individuals who are watching, how can they support you and your work?
Yeah, so we would love anyone who's interested in mentorship, being a positive mentor in your local community, finding out how you do it. So whether you're ready to actually do it right now or finding out how you do it and how you can even be a better mentor in your workplace, in your family, in your school, no matter where you are, right? Whether it's with us or whether it's with another organization. Mentorship is not contained to one organization. But if you're interested in either volunteering with us or learning about mentorship overall, go to bebignow.org. Again, that's bebignow.org. And you can find out if you're interested in getting involved in a local community here in the U.S. It's an easy way for you to put in your zip code if you're based in the U.S. If you're not based in the U.S. and you're looking for more tips, resources, or how you do it no matter where you live, you can find out more information on our websites that way as well. So we would love to get you involved, love to get you engaged. And for those who are listening and want to get connected with me, please find me on LinkedIn under Artis Stevens, and would love to stay connected with those who are viewing and listening here today.
Thank you so much, Artis, for your amazing words. The very best of luck with your work as the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters. Amazing. And thank you for participating in Anti-Racism Live.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Good luck.